So let's go ahead and look at some of the end pieces here that I have. This is the rear hub. This bolts onto the front piece, and then this swings independently as it goes. You can see here's where the axle goes, right in this side. And then this side right here is where the bearing goes. This is the bearing that I pulled out of it. It's called a cage roller bearing. 1.5 inch diameter bore on the inside for the axle. Brillion still makes these. It's part number 1, C as in Charlie, 087. Unfortunately, they get well over $100 a piece for them yet. I have found aftermarket ones. I was quoted about $13 for an aftermarket, which is probably the way to go if you need 4 of them. And then that bearing slides right inside there like that. And then there's a plug that goes on the end here with a grease fitting on it and a clip that goes right in this groove in here. I don't know if you can see that or not, but then that holds the grease plug in, and then the axle goes right in through this side and spins on that bearing in there. And this is what it looks like when both pieces are together. You can see that rear axle hinges on the front, and then you got the front bearing here and the rear bearing back here, and then the angle iron clips onto that, and that's really all there is to the ends. I thought this was interesting. I started cleaning it up with a wire brush, and I could find the patent number here. It says patent April 1876. So I don't know if this one's that old, I doubt it, but they have been making this exact style since 1876. I hit everything with a 4.5 inch grinder with a wire wheel on it first, and then I go over it all with a wire brush to get everything I can't get with that. Once everything looses off, then I go over it a couple times with Prep-Sol. That removes all the grease and oil from it, and then Rust-Oleum makes a primer that's made for rusty metal, and I've used that in the past and that works very well. Put a couple coats of that on, and then we're ready for paint. Here's the old frame off that Packer. You can see where they welded it 2 or 3 times to try to put her back together, and it looks like the tongue got ran over. So I'm just going to go ahead and replace all the steel. I don't have any way to straighten it or weld it back together the way it needs to be. Here's the 2 axles out of that Packer. Nice and straight yet, a little rust, but otherwise they're okay. I'll get those ends cleaned up and get those bearings back on. Drilling the holes in the angle iron for the tongue. Got it centered right here, 2 here, and 2 here. Okay, I've got my first hole drilled in for the tongue, and I've got this squared off to the back piece of the frame. Once I've got that set, I've got some 1-inch channel that I'm going to use for supports. I'll just go ahead and put this in here at 45, and then I'll do the same thing on this side. Get my 45 here. And then I'll drill that one in here and drill a hole here, and I'll use 1 bolt to connect these 2. Alright, I've got the holes drilled for the support braces and the back bar there, and I've got bolts in finger tight to hold them in place, and you can see right here where they meet. I rechecked everything for square, so we're right where we need to be, but you can see with the edges on here that these are actually going to go underneath the tongue, but with these edges there's going to be a big gap. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark them here and here, and then I'm going to take my grinder and take this edge off from here to here so they'll fit nice and flush. I flipped the angle iron over so you can get a better idea what it's going to look like. I got the two support braces bolted in, and now that I've got the ends ground down, you can see they fit nice and flush there. I'll put a bolt hole through that to hold the brace together, and we'll line up that second piece of angle iron, and we should be good with the tongue and the support braces. I bolted the end pieces in, snugged them up pretty good, and that'll tell me right where that second piece of angle iron has to go. I've already got the holes drilled in the angle iron. I centered that. Once I get those drilled, I'll get the bolts in there, and then we'll have the frame done. Okay, I've got the axles ready to go. You can see that they're different sizes. The one's about 4 inches longer than the other. The longer one is the rear axle, and the shorter one is the front axle. And in the Brillion it makes a difference because they have the little wheels go on the back and the big packers go on the front. So you don't want to get all the packer wheels on there and then realize you put them on the wrong axle and have to switch them all again. Okay, now the fun part. You can see that there's a groove right on the inside there, and that's where the grease plug goes. So the axle can only come up to that. If it goes farther than that, then it'll push the grease plug out. So here's where you kind of got to do a little finagling. I've seen them with a lot of different spacers in them. Pretty much we'll get one side set, and then we'll see if we need to put spacers in it and try to get it to line up. Alright, we've got the axle in. We went ahead and slid the bearing in around the axle. Next comes the grease plug. This just goes right in the end like that, and then you can see that there's a groove right here, and we have a retaining clip, and that retaining clip goes right in that groove, and that holds the grease plug in. That's what it looks like when it's all finished. And the grease does two things. One, obviously it lubricates the axle so that doesn't wear in the bearing. But they also put it on this end so when you pump the grease in, it pushes the dirt and everything out towards the axle, because that's where the sand and grit's going to come in. So it's a good idea to hit it with a little grease every time you use it. Keep pushing that dirt out of there. That'll make that bearing last a lot longer. Okay, now that we got the end pieces set, we're ready to start putting the angle iron on. Got to think about this ahead of time because we got the holes drilled already. We want the two close holes for the support beams to go on the front. So you got to figure out which way the second set is going, and the second set of packer wheels is going to come out on this side. So we'll put her together just like this. Let's flip it right over here. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is put the tongue on. That'll help us do two things. One, it'll hold the angle iron still and centered, which will help us adjust the end pieces. and 2, it'll give us something to hold on to so we can tilt it forward to make it a little bit easier to work with. And we can tilt it forward like that, a little bit easier to work on. Okay, we've got the end pieces bolted in. Now we'll go ahead and start putting the support braces on. Okay, time to start working on the second row of packers. You'll notice these are smaller. The front ones are 15s and these are 11s. Alright, we'll start putting the hub on the rear axle here. Hub on. Slide the bearing in there. There we go. We'll drop in a pin. All that does is keep the bearing from sliding out, and once it's in there it can't go anywhere. And I don't know if you can see the grease line in there. Plug in next. There we go. And then next the clip goes right in that groove there. I'll grab pliers and pop that in, and this one will be done. There we go. I'm guessing somebody welded this on here just to protect that grease fitting in that pin. They all have it and they're all right on the front here, but I don't know if that's factory or not. I'm doubting it. Okay, I just spent the last 10 minutes wiggling this thing around trying to get it to line up right, and I think we're pretty close. One of the things I found interesting, I searched the Brillion website and I actually found the parts manual for this. They still have it on there if you need it. I don't know if you can still order all the parts or not. Right here it had a bushing. That bushing was shot, so I found a piece of pipe that was the same diameter and cut that off and smoothed it up, and we'll just use that instead. But what I found interesting was that this rear portion of this Cultipacker was not only used on Cultipackers, but they also used it on cedars. So if you see like a drop cedar with the same arrangement, it's all the same parts. I suppose all they'd have to do is change the length of the axle and they could make an 8-foot or a 10-foot Cultipacker to pull behind something. And it's kind of neat. With this, you take the one bolt out and you got a single row packer, and you put the bolt in and you've got a double row. If you had a drop cedar that was 6 foot wide, this is 7 foot, all you'd have to do is mount some sort of bolt attachment to it, and you could use the rear part of this Cultipacker to follow a drop cedar. And there we go. And one other thing, I saw these 2 hooks on here. Couldn't figure out what those were for. That schematic showed that there was a spring that went between the 2 of them. I'm not sure what that was supposed to do, if it was supposed to add some down pressure or to keep it from popping up and hitting. But I'm going to give it a try, and if it looks like it needs a spring, then I'll see if I can find a pretty heavy duty spring that'll fit in there, and then it'll be right back where it was at the factory. have to make a coupler for the tongue yet, but otherwise all the mechanical is done. Pack everything with grease and pull it for 100 yards and pack it with grease again. Do that a couple times till it's good and greased up and those bearings are good, and we should be ready to go.